Okay, the next part with defining a project is called the work breakdown structure, or you're going to hear WBS. This is going to be a little longer lecture, so bear with me, but this is really an important part of defining the project structure. Okay, so let's get into what is a work breakdown structure. So remember, we said we're going to cover in this chapter defining the project scope, establishing priorities. We did that in the first lecture. Now we're going to talk about creating this work breakdown structure. The next lecture I'll do some examples on the work breakdown structure, and then we'll get into the responsibility matrices and communication plan. So here's a work breakdown structure. Again, you'll hear WBS. It's a hierarchical outline or map that defines the products and work elements in a project. You're going to see that. We're going to have a hierarchy of the products we need to deliver. Okay? It defines the relationship of those and the subdeliverables, and eventually what we're going to get to at the bottom level of this diagram is what we call work packages. What is the work you have to do that project? So that's why this is very important, because we're going to end up getting down to what work do we have to do. Now, this is best suited for projects that have tangible outcomes. And by that I mean a real product, hardware, software, mechanical, structural. But it can be worked for process too. And I'll show you in the examples next lecture on a process example and then a product example. So, definition: product-oriented family tree composed of hardware, software, services, data, facilities. It relates the elements. You're going to see how it relates them. It can be expressed down to any level. You're going to see we're going to do this in levels, and you'll see that. You can go down to any level. However, usually you need to at least do the top three, and then you'll break down the lower levels as needed. And you'll see each branch of this may go down to different levels depending on what that is. Okay, so some will go down to level 4, 5, whatever, depending on what that is. So let's look at an example here. This might be a system, an aircraft system. So it's got an air vehicle. Okay, it's got system engineering. It's got support. It's got training. I have to deliver training. I have to test this thing, and I have to deliver manufacturing. What do I mean by that? I have to usually set up the manufacturing line because I'm going to build more of these. So I'm delivering all of that. Now what we do is we break it down into pieces. So let's just break down one piece. The air vehicle, it's got an airframe, it has propulsion, it has fire control. Okay, now I break down, let's just take fire control. I break that down into, that has radar, it has its own system engineering, its own support, its own training, its own tests, its own manufacturing, because I have to manufacture this fire control system that goes into this aircraft. Now I take the radar and I break the radar down into receiver, transmitter, antenna, software, and so forth. So I keep breaking this down until I feel comfortable that I understand all the pieces I need to do on this project. Again, we'll go through a couple examples and you'll see how this works. So how does it help the project manager? Facilitates evaluation of cost, time, and performance. So what does that mean? So in each one of these, I'm going to have a cost. Each one of these, I'm going to have a schedule. How long did it take me to design the receiver? What's the schedule? How long does it take me to design the transmitter? What's the schedule? So forth. So I'm going to have different pieces for that. provides management with the appropriate information for each level, helps in the development of the organizational breakdown structure. Okay, we'll get into that in a minute, but what's the difference? Work breakdown structure defines the work I have to do. We're going to map that to an organizational breakdown structure. Which organization needs to do each piece? Is it the software organization, the electrical, the mechanical? Who has to do the different pieces? So now we'll get a mapping, we'll show that here's the products, here's the organizations, who's going to do these. Helps you manage the plan, the schedule, and the budget, and helps you define some of the communication channels we'll see. So here's how we're going to do it. We get the complete project. We define our deliverables, our sub-deliverables. Again, this might be the radar, this might be the antenna in the radar, and so forth. This might be some part under that. So we'll have certain levels. Eventually, we'll get down to the lowest level is the actual work that has to be done. This is defining the different pieces. This will define the cost for that piece, and now this is the work for the piece, and that's called the work package, and that's always the lowest level. A work package lowest level defines what work you're doing, how much time you have, what's the budget for that, what are the resources for that, who's responsible for that task, and what are some of the milestones. So now you've broken this huge project down to all these work packages that now you can assign to people and you can measure. And this becomes critical, especially on larger projects. And again, we'll get into details so you'll see some of these a little bit better. Things you do not include in the WBS. So you do not include elements which are not products. For example, you don't have a box that just says design engineering. Okay, what does that mean? What is the product? You might have engineering drawings under the radar or something, and you might have radar requirements. The analysis is to get that requirement might be a work package, but it is not one of the products. Usually you don't do a WBS in phases. Well, my boxes are development, test, and so forth. Now you got to be careful here. When we say test, you might have a box that says test that's defining the test equipment that you need, because a lot of programs have certain test equipment. Then you could have a test box, but the fact that you're just running a test is not a higher level deliverable. It might be some tasks. Rework, retesting, refurbishing, okay, those are all things you might have to do to get your product delivered, but those aren't boxes on your WBS. You don't have on there a box refurbish software or something. Cost saving and affordability things also aren't on there. They might be tasks underneath it, but they're not a specific deliverable. What does a deliverable mean there? Elements not to include. You usually don't do this as a structure of the program office. Cost for meetings, travel, things like that, etc. You don't put those in your WBS elements. You bid those in your tasks, okay, type of thing, but you don't put those as a separate box. Usually for those of you who are doing manufacturing, you don't treat tooling as a separate element. It's included as part of that element you're doing. So if I need tooling to do radar, it's part of the radar one. I don't have a separate one as part of just the general program. So Work detail, work package detail. So now, everybody always asks, okay, so boy, how far down do I take this thing now? You just told me each one of these levels can go deeper and deeper depending on them. So you're going to have to learn from experience, but typically your work packages should be short enough that you can measure. Typically, we say 10 work days or 1 reporting period. So if you want to be able to measure things in pieces, you try to make these packages pretty well defined. Okay? I would say as a general rule, every 2 weeks, that's 10 work days, no more than 2 months. So this is going to depend, and I'm going to give you an example here. It may depend on who's doing this for you and so forth, but you're going to see if you make them too long, it's too hard to measure. And so some of it may depend on the confidence of the task. If this is a task you've done over and over again, and the person you have on it's done it over and over again, you might accept some longer things, but it gets really hard to measure. So let's give an example. I'm doing environmental testing of some widget at Wiley Labs. Their environmental tests. So what do I need to do? I need to deliver my product to the labs and set it up. I might want to do vibration tests, shock tests, thermal tests, salt fog, electromagnetic interference tests. I might have a group of tests. And I might have a teardown and delivery. So, you've done this before on boxes. Let's again say this is the radar box. Doesn't matter, but you've done this before and it's typically 7 weeks. So do you do 1 work package for 7 weeks? You could, but then if you're halfway through, so week 3.5, and you ask the engineer where he or she is, and they're going to go, well, I think I'm about 50% of the way through, so we're good. Are you okay with that? Well, if you trust this engineer, maybe. But if not, and I just did 7 weeks because, look, I have 7 tasks here. Let's just pretend all these were a week task. You could. What if I set this up, though, instead of 1 work package of 7 weeks, I set it up to 7 work packages. Delivery setup, vibration, shock. I made each of those a work package. Now, at the end of 3.5 weeks, I should be in the middle of thermal. I go to the engineer, and again, he or she says, yep, we're in the middle of thermal, we're right on schedule, because I've set up these work packages. So how much definition do you want? How much do you trust and stuff? Usually you like to try to set it up so that you can get some better measurement of where you are along the way. Okay, so here's a work breakdown structure, and the book had used this example. Here's a personal computer. It might have keyboard, mouse, disk storage, software, the microprocessor, and so forth. Okay, so now let's break down the disk storage. This is really old because it says floppy. We don't do that anymore, but let's say you had a floppy drive, call that USB now, optical, and a hard drive. Okay, let's take the hard drive. We now have the hard drive. It has a motor. It's not a solid state. It's a normal hard drive, so we got a motor. We got some circuit boards. You got a chassis. Needs to be in the chassis, and it's got a rewrite head on it. So now you have all these pieces of this hard drive. Now I drew a little arrow here because they made it look like, in the version of the book I cut this from, that this is level 5. Well, this would really be level 4. They just drew this down, but this is the next level down. This would be your level 4. And that's your lowest level. You don't think you need to break the motor down any further. You don't need to break the circuit board down or the chassis or whatever. Now you'll notice underneath each of these, WP, work package 1. Why is there only one for the motor? Because maybe all your work package for the motor is you're going to go pick a motor and go order it. Okay, so your work package is research motors and order one. Circuit board, though, might have a bunch of work packages. Might be do circuit design, might do circuit analysis, thermal analysis, board layout, mounting the board, testing the board, and so forth. So you might have certain work packages under that. The frame might be designing the frame, doing a structural analysis of the frame, building the frame up. So you're now breaking it down into what are the things I need to do to get my circuit board or my chassis or my read-write head, so whatever. And those are what's called your work packages. Those are what you're going to assign people to, because they may be the same person, they may be different people doing these tasks. So how do we integrate this with the organization? The organizational breakdown structure. So this is going to depict how the firm does this. So we're going to identify the units that do this. So here's this same thing here. And again, this still shows us at 5, but remember this would be at 4. So, and you can see that. We're going to get into numbering later, but you can see the levels. Level 1, because 1.1, 2 levels, 1.11. So that's, but you see there's 3 numbers, so we're at level 3. Level 4, 1131, 4 numbers, so we're at level 4. And we'll get into the numbering in a minute. So, the motor. So remember I said the motor had one work package. So maybe that's because all we're doing is purchasing a motor. So we need purchasing to do that work package. Circuit board, I might have tasks in design. I might have tasks in cost, in production, I'm sorry. I might have tests, I might have software. So I might have different tasks and different organizations are doing those tasks. Okay, so chassis frame, maybe it's here. So now I break down those work packages that we had all the way up here. These were fictitious, pretend we had them. And I'm going to break each of those down to what organizations they are. Some organizations could have 2 work packages or more, whatever, but you still are separating it into chunks that are measurable. So this is going to get us that work package by organization. So now we define the coding, defines the level of the elements and so forth. And that was this coding that we showed back here that's shown here, but this way is looking at it. I think it's easier to look at it as you're indenting it. Computer project, disk storage, it's broken down into these pieces. The hard drive's broken down into the motor and the read-write. That motor is broken down into another level. So now we're taking these down and defining these levels here, and that's what's called the coding. We're going to get into Microsoft Project, where are we? Probably another week or 2. And you'll see that Microsoft Project will do this coding for us once we have it set up. Okay, so this is what we mean though by WBS coding, and now you can assign these different work packages to different organizations. Okay, here's some good, this is a little hard to read, sorry, but this is the way this kind of cut out that I found. So correct and incorrect WBS. So let's look at over here, airframe. There's our air vehicle, the wing, the fuselage, the flight control, the hydraulics, all these are nice packages. These are products within that airframe. That's a good way of doing it. Versus over here, if you took the airframe and said design, engineering, fabrication, and assembly, I can't measure that. Those are huge packages for design engineering. I can't make that into nice packages. So you want to watch how you break it down into nice, clear packages. Communications here, the radio link, the data link, the software, nice packages. Versus over here, calling the communications manufacturing, engineering, quality, and material. Those are organizations. Those aren't work packages or products. So you have to be careful. Fire control. Okay, fire control's got the radar, the computer, displays, so forth. Nice. Fire control, non-recurring and recurring. So non-recurring means you only do it once. Recurring means like manufacturing, doing it over and over again. These aren't products to me. This doesn't help me define my products and my WBS. Software should be included in the hardware it supports. In this figure, that's what they say. I can argue this one a little bit of both ways. Generally speaking, I agree with this. So if you have software for communication, it should be in the software it should be under communication software. Fire control software should be here because that product needs that software. Okay, and you expect them, especially if this is a supplier, you might expect them to deliver that software with that product. So it is better with the product. Depending on the software, there are some cases when you might group software like this. So I won't say this is a hell no, don't do this always. You have to think about it. But generally speaking, you want the software with the product that it's being delivered with. System test and evaluation. Production acceptance test, first article test. Again, you should probably have those in the product. Okay, so production acceptance tests. So let's take the communications. I want to have the test for the comm in test. I want to have the test for fire control in there. I want the test for the whole system to be under system. Okay, so got to break out again the tests and the first article inspections and things like that with the product they're supposed to be with. But generally speaking, at the end, you will have tests for your whole product as it's integrated. So try to put things where they go. Okay, so you've defined this WBS. The last piece, and the book doesn't have this, but again, PMP will. You'll have a WBS dictionary in many cases. So a dictionary is a document that provides a detailed information about each element. So it's just, in other words, describe. If the element is not clear, it's describing the element. Many times an element's clear by the title, but in many cases it's not. So the dictionary kind of gets into more detail on what each of those elements are. So I'll give you an example in a minute. So many tasks are vague and they need this dictionary to break this out. Again, I don't read everything here. You can read that. So here's an example. Let's take a bicycle. I got a bicycle. I maybe have a frame. I have wheels, maybe gears. I broke it up into the frame. I broke down into a frame and a handlebar. Okay? Well, what do we mean by, again, most of the time we understand these, but you can see how it is. Frame set, the individual components that together constitute the frame once assembled. The frame itself is the unit tubular structure. Okay, the handlebar used by the rider to steer. So it's defining these things in more detail. Again, many times to me they're clear. We all kind of know what a handlebar is. But in some cases you don't. So the dictionary is written to help you understand what can't be in the figure. And lots of times you'll put the responsible organization in there too. Dictionaries have different forms depending on your organization, but as a minimum they're described in these boxes, and it's usually delivered with your WBS. If you want more resources, I'm certainly not going to test on any of these things, but the Department of Defense has a handbook for the preparation of statement of works and a handbook for work breakdown structures. These are public access and gives you some more detail if you're ever interested in some of these. Another example on an aircraft system here. And again, I'm going to go into 2 other examples coming up in the next lecture. Maybe if I looked at this book here, it might give me a missile system WBS. So if I'm starting a missile system, this is kind of what they're expecting. So they give you kind of a overview, and then you can tailor from that. Or if you're doing software, they'll typically give you example WBS for software package in there. So different examples could be in the book that are good starting points for you. Generally speaking, if you're going to go to a company, bigger companies especially, they're going to have WBSs you can start from and learn from. So you might hear your program WBS and your contract WBS. So many times, depending on big contracts, they might have a WBS within the contract, and you may have to fit into their WBS for the contract level. I'm not going to go into detail on this. I just want you, and not test it, just want you to understand that in some cases you're going to have to fit within a contract WBS. So understand if there is one, and do you need to fit into that contract WBS. So final word about WBSs before we do an example here. Key to understanding your products and tasks. It's an iterative process. In the real world, you never get this right the first time. We're going to do a project in this class, and I'll give you a couple times to do it, but in generally speaking, it takes a lot more than a couple times. You're constantly iterating this until a certain point where you think it's good enough and you're going with it. And like I mentioned before, first time construct can seem daunting to you to get it done, but in general practice, most of your organizations are going to have WBSs they've had from previous projects, and you can go take that and start with it. So if Raytheon Missile Systems, I'm going to start with a previous WBS. For GM or some car company, they're going to have WBSs for previous car efforts. So how do you change it? Construction companies, so forth. So you probably have something to start with in most cases, and now you have to modify that because every project is different. So next, like I said, we'll do a couple examples on WBS.